Welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll know when new videos are available. I really hope you enjoy this one. So today we're going to look at the residential listing agreement and some of the forms that go along with it, but we're going to really get into it, talk about some of the paragraphs, talk about some stuff that's in it that maybe we don't normally pay attention to. Part of this came from a conversation I had with an agent in regards to those love letters, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And just really so you guys understand how that listing agreement works, things that you need to do with it, how you could really explain it properly to the potential sellers that you're presenting to, or to the sellers you're presenting to. And one of the reasons why we want to make sure that we're having that conversation properly with them is because most agents don't, but then want to enforce the agreement. They want to enforce what the terms of that listing agreement, and their sellers have no idea what they agreed to, right? And so it makes it harder to have that disagreement. So I just want to make sure that you guys are clear. The conversations you're having with your seller, make sure your sellers are understanding the form. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And what you guys should be seeing right now is the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships, which is where I always start with this and with the purchase agreement. And part of the reason I always like to, when we talk about the RPA or we talk about the listing agreement, is spend a little time on the disclosure regarding agency relationships, is because there's still some misunderstanding on the parts of agents when I hear them, excuse me, when I hear them having conversations with clients, or, even when we're doing some of the presentations in the office for the practice for the listing presentation, there's still some confusion on what this form is, what it does, right? What it implies. So let's talk about it quickly. So the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships is just what it says it is. It is a disclosure. It is not a binding agreement. It does not force you to work with the seller, because we're going to talk about sellers, because in this case we're referring to the listing agreement. It does not require you to continue to work with the seller. It does not require the seller to work with you. And so we want to make sure that everybody's clear on what it is, because if we're starting off our relationship with the seller by explaining something improperly, this simple thing that we're supposed to have, then it kind of undermines who we are going forward, right? In that relationship with that seller. So first off, this form, what it does is it discloses to the potential client, seller or buyer, how they may be represented by an agent in a real estate transaction. Okay? So first off, as a seller's agent, you could be represented. In this case, because we're talking about the listing and I'm on a listing appointment, I'm going to be, for the moment, representing you as a seller's agent. Now, once we get into a transaction, that could change, and I'll explain that to you in a moment. So seller's agent, you could be represented as a seller's agent, where that agent represents your interest only. Or a buyer's agent, and that buyer's agent represents the interests of the buyer. Or as an agent representing both buyer and seller. Both buyer and seller means we're acting as dual agent. And in that particular case where I want to act as dual agent, not only do I have to disclose it to you, but I have to get your permission to do that, to act as a dual agent. Okay? So that's what this is. That's all this is just an explanation of how they are represented and how they can be represented. This is not confirming that agency, right? We'll be confirming that agency when we get into a transaction with a buyer. But at the moment, these are the three ways that you could be represented by an agent. And this representation is not just solely me as the licensee that you're hiring to represent you, it's my entire brokerage. So this is really looking at the brokerage's position in a transaction. The brokerage can act solely as the listing agent working for the seller, solely as a buyer's agent representing a buyer, or the brokerage can be representing both buyer and seller. That's still dual agency, even if myself, right? I'm the listing agent and someone who works in this office is representing the buyer. That's still dual agency. And we have to make sure that our clients are aware of what that means, right? That's what dual agency means, not just me representing both parties, right? So we have to make sure that's clear. Now they sign, they have got a copy of this. Now, as far as the disclosure regarding agency relationship goes, even if they never sign my listing agreement, technically, if I do a listing presentation, I'm supposed to have one of those. Same with a buyer. If a buyer never writes an offer with me, or I never show that buyer property, but I do sit down with a buyer and have a buyer consultation with them, I've got to have one of these signed. Because this form is not really, it's created by CAR, but it's to make sure that we are in compliance with the civil code, which was set up by the Department of Real Estate in the state of California. So what it says is that this is my duty, according to the Department of Real Estate and the state of California, to make sure you're aware of your agency relationships, how you can be represented, and what my fiduciary duty is to you. Okay? So we're supposed to, right? Letter of the law is I'm supposed to have this for everybody that I discuss real estate with, right? So we don't want to take it so far as to I go to a party and somebody asks me, hey, how's the real estate market? Well, before we have that conversation, I need to sign you this disclosure regarding agency relationships and let you understand how you can be represented by an agent. Not that far. But if I sit down with somebody, a seller, and I go over a listing presentation where I am telling them what I do to get their home sold and how much I believe their home is worth and what the marketing process is and what the process is of selling their home and how the MLS works, I go through all of that. I should have this disclosure because that's part of the process of explaining to them how everything works. So technically, yes, I should have this. Do most agents have a disclosure regarding agency relationships signed with people who don't hire them? I would say probably 99% don't, but should we? Yeah, I mean, if one of the very first things that I would do on a presentation, whether that be a listing presentation or a buyer consultation, is I would have them sign this form and go through that whole explanation. By the way, by you signing this, this is not committing us to work together. It's just proof that I've explained to you how you can be represented by an agent and what your rights are as far as that fiduciary relationship goes. That's it. Now, if they refuse to sign it, they refuse to sign it. I'm not going to say, okay, well, that's it. We're stopping the presentation here. But that should be my first thing in an attempt to get them to sign this because legally I need it. Now, one of the benefits of doing this in a listing presentation is that if I can get them to sign this disclosure regarding agency relationships at the very beginning of my listing presentation, and really the easiest way to present that to them is, by the way, I've got to go take a look at your property and I want to see it through the eyes of the buyer and take notes so that I can prepare it for the MLS when we list it and start marketing it. While I'm doing that, legally, I have to have you sign this disclosure that I've explained to you how you could be represented, and here's what this is saying. So why don't you go ahead and take a look at it? You could sign it while I go take a look at the property. If they sign this when you come back and start your presentation, it's a pretty good sign that they're going to sign your listing agreement. If they don't, it's okay. It doesn't mean it's going to be a no. And I'm not saying that you got to twist anybody's arm into signing it. If they refuse, they refuse. It is what it is, okay? Questions regarding the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships before I move on? Anybody? All right, let's move forward. Let's trudge along. By the way, this on the back, just so you know, this is the second page of the disclosure regarding agency relationships. It says do not complete, sample only. I've seen agents still write in here the confirmation. Don't do that. You don't want to confirm your agency at the very beginning because technically what you're doing at that point is now you're locking yourself into only being that person. And what it does is it it starts to now limit your opportunities. Okay, don't do that. Also, don't circle anything. If I'm the listing agent, I'm on listing presentation, I don't want to circle this. I've seen agents do it. Recently, it's less and less, but some of the agents that have been in the business for a long time, they still like to, make a little pen mark circle around seller's agent, like saying, like I am right now, I'm your seller's agent. Don't do that. That could be construed as a confirmation of who you are in the relationship with them and in future transactions. You don't want to confirm anything until you're actually going into transaction. All right, so let's move on. The Fair Housing Discrimination Advisory, I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but what you guys need to understand is what it's saying is that you can't discriminate against anybody based on a protected class, right? So based on their gender, on their sex, on their orientation, on their race, the color of their skin, right? You can't make that decision on purchasing a house or to selling them a house or accepting an offer based on any of those protected classes. You can't do that. That's illegal. You as an agent can't do that. The seller can't do that. It's not just limited to you as an agent that you can't discriminate against somebody. It's also the seller that could be responsible for that discrimination, and then they become now open to punitive damages, compensatory damages, right? Lawsuits, things like that. We don't want to do it. And here's a little breakdown of the protected classes. Okay. What I do want to reference in this is the where is it? I wanted to get back to where is the letters, the love letters, because that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about, and I can't find it now. Yeah, right here. Examples of conduct that may not be motivated by discriminatory intent but could have a discriminatory effect, right? Paragraph 8 of this. Prior to acceptance of an offer, asking for or offering buyer personal information or letters from the buyer, that's the love letters, right? Especially with photos. Those types of documents may inadvertently reveal or be perceived as revealing protected status information, thereby increasing the risk of actual or unconscious bias and potential legal claims against sellers and others by prospective buyers whose offers were rejected. So that's talking about love letters. That's referring to the love letters in this and saying, we don't want you to use it, not because somebody is going to use this to discriminate against you as buyer, even though they could, but it's the perception of that. So for example, I have a client that is part of a protective class, right? Whatever that may be. They're two men that have a child, and they write this letter, and they write a letter, and they say how much they love this and how much they'd love to raise their child, right? And they submit that letter. And the seller looks at it and reads it and says, oh, that's wonderful. I'd love for them to have it, but their offer is less. They don't make as much money as these other people, so I'm going to accept this other offer just based on the merits of the offer. Now, if that couple wanted to make a case out of it and say, well, they didn't accept our offer because they saw that we were two men and our child and they didn't like that, they can make a case, even if the seller didn't have that issue. And vice versa, maybe the seller does have an issue with that family and says, I don't agree with their lifestyle, so I don't want. So that's why they're trying to discourage the idea of these love letters, is because inadvertently it could work both ways. As a buyer, it could limit your chances because they don't know who you are in a purchase. If you just look at a purchase agreement in a vacuum and you've never met the seller, they don't know who you are. They don't know what race you are. They don't know what gender. They don't know your sexual orientation. They don't know how you identify. They don't know any of those things. They don't know if you're handicapped. Or disabled. Sorry, handicapped is terrible. If you're disabled, they don't know any of those things. So they can't make a decision based on that. They make the decision just based on the merits of the purchase agreement. so you don't put yourself in the position where maybe you're giving them information that they shouldn't know, that shouldn't matter on whether they choose your offer or not. But you do by inadvertently by writing this letter about how much you love their property. And vice versa, as a seller, I shouldn't want to get these letters because it could be somebody who is litigious or thinks that there is something unfair happening and why their offer wasn't accepted. They could use it and say, well, I think it's because we wrote a letter. And then what they're going to do is those buyers that wrote the letter, they're going to blame their buyer's agent, because most of the time it's the buyer's agent is encouraging them to write this letter because they think it's going to help. So if I were you, I would just stay away from those altogether. Now, as far as what I would tell the seller, there is in the listing agreement, and we'll get to that today, there is a section, a paragraph in the listing agreement that gives them the opportunity to say to you, because the default is I don't want those letters for the seller. But if your seller is like, I want something from them personally, okay, there's a section where we could check that off that they accept it. And we'll talk about that when we get to the listing agreement. Okay, so let's move on from the fair housing. But any questions about that before I go to the next one? Anybody?
I have a question, Kyle.
Yeah, go ahead.
What if your buyers are like insisting because they've read online or whatever on writing one of those letters? Is there like
Yeah, but you've got to show them, hey, first of all, the fair housing practices, the civil code discourages us from doing it. The listing agreement states that we can only submit those love letters if the agent puts in the MLS. Otherwise, we have to assume if the agent doesn't put it in the MLS, and we're going to talk about this with the listing, that the seller is accepting these letters from the buyer. We can't submit it because the default is that contractually the seller is not to be accepting those.
got it?
And
Okay.
so you've got to discourage your buyers. It becomes your job, right? If the idea is that I am the professional, I am the one who's guiding my buyers, I've got to be the one to tell them, do not do it. I don't care what you've read online, and this is why. And that's it. And that's where you have to leave it. Now, if you have a seller that wants it, you got to try to discourage the seller from wanting it. But then if they put it in the listing contract, and I'll show you where it is in the listing agreement, it says, hey, this may be a bad idea, but okay, you've told me you want to do it. Darwin is waving at me twice in here, so I'm guessing he has a question.
It's my second question, but I forgot the first one, but I want to ask you this. Let's say you get that letter in my listing.
Mm-hmm.
What will you do? You have to present it to the seller?
No, I'm not presenting it. As a matter of fact, this was the conversation, and I'm sure, I don't know if Danny's on the class right now. I don't think he'd mind. This is Danny, and I had this conversation that he received a letter on his listing. And what I told him to do was not present the letter, to politely say to the buyer's agent, thank you for submitting your offer. I understand that you submitted this, love letter, for better, lack of a better term. You submitted this love letter for the seller. The seller does not want those letters, and I will not be presenting that letter to them. So they know that you're not doing it. And then tell them, per fair housing and my listing agreement, I'm not required to present this, and it's discouraged for us to use these, so I'm not going to be presenting it. Let them know for sure, and dispose of it. Don't keep it. You don't tell anybody. Don't tell your seller, hey, there was a love letter that I didn't give you. Just get rid of it. Just get rid of it. That's what I would do. So hope that helps. But if you get it, don't present them unless prior to marketing the property, when we go through the listing agreement, you had that conversation with the seller. Seller goes, yes, I'd love to know why people want to buy my house. I want to, there are those sellers out there like, I want to make sure a family has it. I get it. If they want it, fill out it properly, and then you put it in the MLS that they're willing to accept those things. But as long as everybody's on the same page. But I would discourage it. All right, any other questions? All right, perfect. Okay, so possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, disclosure and consent. Quickly, we'll go through this, but this is earlier when I talked to you guys about the disclosure regarding agency relationships. I said, I have to get your permission to act as dual agent. This form is the form that gives me that permission to act as a dual agent by them signing it. So what it's saying in here is that as the brokerage, right, we may be representing multiple buyers and multiple sellers that are all very similar. Okay? Meaning Me personally, when I take your listing, this is the conversation I have with the seller, I may have another listing myself where I am the licensee, the associate licensee of the brokerage that signed the listing agreement. I have a listing that's very similar to yours. I have this listing in Downey that's 3 bedrooms, 2 baths for $800,000. And I'm about to take your listing that's a 3 bedroom, 2 bath in Downey for $800,000. That could happen, right? Especially if that's what you are, a listing agent. You could have multiple listings that are very similar. Someone may choose to buy the other listed property over yours. It has nothing to do with them being pushed to the other property or dissuaded from purchasing yours. It is just what is happening in the market. And the same thing, meaning under the brokerage, is I might have the listing and 4 or 5 other agents may have a listing that's very similar to yours in the city of Downey or Peak or whatever other city we're working in. That's what they're saying. Hey, we just need you to understand that there's other sellers that are very similar to yours, and their homes may sell faster or yours may sell faster. It is all just a determination of the market and what we do to make sure everybody goes through. Same thing for buyers, right? But the dual agency here is if the seller is represented by the broker, seller acknowledges that broker may represent prospective buyers of seller's property. When they're talking about broker, they're talking about the whole office. So if you ever have a seller that says, well, I don't want dual agency. I don't want you to represent the buyer and me. I don't think that that's fair. I think there's a conflict of interest there. Totally understandable. They're not going to sign this form because this is giving us permission to act as dual agents. But what we have to make them understand is that I can understand that you don't want me to represent both buyer and seller because you feel like there's a conflict of interest there. But by not signing this and giving the brokerage the permission to act as dual agents, what you're doing now is you're eliminating 200 of the best agents in our market from being able to sell your home. And if our goal is to get your home sold as fast as possible and for as much money as possible, we don't want to eliminate the best agents in the market. We want to make sure they're included. So what I would have you do is still sign this and give the other agents in my brokerage an opportunity to sell your home. But in my listing contract, I'm going to write that I personally cannot act as dual agent. Is that fair? Right? Because we don't want to do that. If we get them to say no dual agency period, then that means if I have a listing, none of you guys in the office can sell it. And that's not what we want to do. You guys want to have the opportunities. I mean, that's the point of us as a brokerage having listings, is that our agents should have better opportunities, right? Because they get to see it, they know about it, we have relationships, all those things. And that's how all brokerages work. Even though we put it out in the MLS, we offer it to other brokers. That working together is what makes us as successful as possible. And we want to be able to do that. We don't want to eliminate the agents that we have a relationship with that can make for good transactions. So you have to have that conversation with your potential seller or with your sellers to make sure they understand the importance of signing this and give everybody under the brokerage umbrella the ability to act as a buyer's agent, as dual agents. Okay? Questions about that, about dual agents? Oh, the last thing. Offers are not necessarily confidential. It's important to know that. Now, I know that most listing agents, if you ask them what their best offer is, they're going to tell you, I can't tell you that. Submit your best offer. But just know that what this form says is that, hey, offers are not necessarily confidential. It may be a market practice that the offers become confidential. It may not be. You may have a confidentiality agreement signed with the clients. That's why it's confidential. But normally, it is not by default a confidential document, the offers that are received by the seller and the listing agent on your property. That's it. All right. Questions? No? All right. Wire fraud. We're not going to go into this. All you got to know is tell your clients, do not wire any money to anybody that you get from an email without checking with me first. Let's verify that the MLS, that the escrow wire information that you received that email for is correct. We don't want people to fall prey to wire fraud because it still happens often, where they'll get, a spam email that looks like it came from the escrow company. They'll wire money to this shell company and it's gone forever, right? And so we don't want that to happen. So just let your clients know, do not wire any funds to anybody without checking with me first, so that we can verify that we're doing it to the correct entity. All right. All right, so now we're into the listing agreement proper. Date prepared. It's very simple. What day am I writing this, right? So, for example, we're writing it today, the 19th, right? Exclusive right to sell. If you click in this, I have the ability to, I don't know why it's doing that to me, but okay. I put the seller's names in there, right? First name, second name. If there's more than one, you got to kind of cram them in there. We're going to use additional signature addendums, okay? But seller's names. Oh, so the seller is John Smith, right? We're going to say the seller's John Smith. Can't type right now. Seller's John Smith, okay? So there's one seller. The begin date. Oh, the broker, Century 21 All-Stars. That's the brokerage, right? That's who we work for. The begin date. Let's say that even though I'm writing this listing contract today, my listing presentation is tomorrow. So your date prepared and your begin date on your listing contracts may not match. Okay? End date. Now, depending on what type of sale this is, it could limit the amount of time we put, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But let's say I want to do a 6-month contract, right? So I would do what is that? November, December, January, February, March, April, right? So it will go to April of 20. Oh, what happened? Sorry about that. April of 2024. Right, so we'll go to April 20th. That's it. So there's my 6-month listing agreement. Now, what you guys all need to understand is that without a begin date and without an end date, this listing is unenforceable. You can't have either of those blank or both of those blank, have that listing signed and have it be an enforceable listing. It must have a begin date. It must have an end date. Okay, has to. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Okay, now, if I want to, for example, I'm worried about days on market, right? So we could talk about coming soon and registered and all those things in a moment when we get to the MLS. But let's say that I know that I've spoken with John Smith. I want to start listing the property right away. But he says, no, it's not going to be ready for 3 months. Okay. So it's not going to be ready for 3 months. The problem is that what some agents would do is they would, even though I'm going to go meet with them and it's not going to be ready, is they might put this contract 2 months out, like say, okay, well, it's going to start on December 1st because coming soon doesn't last long enough and I want to go market it. The problem with that is that if my start date is December 1st, even if I go get them to sign it today, that means that this listing isn't valid till December 1st. If somebody goes in and says, hey, listen, I have a buyer right now today that's going to buy it, all I need to do is sign this listing contract, we'll close in 20 days, and he agrees to it, that listing could also be valid, and it would be valid because it's before my start date. So I would have done my listing presentation, did all this stuff, got him to agree, and then somebody else would go in and get another listing agreement signed. And even if it wasn't for 30 days, it could be a 2-month listing. It could be all the way up until November 30th. They could start listing it now and list it till November 30th, a month listing, whatever it is, and then say, okay, now we sold it before you had a chance to, and that would be perfectly legal. So I would, if it was my choice, if I was going to listing present, even if I knew that the property wasn't going to be ready for a couple months, I would get the listing signed active the day that I sign it, because I don't want anybody else to be able to swoop in, and then do the things that are correct. And I'll show you those when we get to paragraph 7. Okay, so must have a begin date, must have an end date. Now, understand this. Let's say that I made my listing agreement today, right? Date prepared is today. My appointment was supposed to be tomorrow for the start date, but it gets delayed till Saturday, which instead of the 20th is now becomes the 21st, right? If they sign the listing on the 21st, or let's say it gets delayed until Monday, the 23rd, if they sign the listing agreement on the 23rd, just so you guys know that you're following the protocol with the MLS, if they sign on the 23rd, even though your begin date says October 20th, the actual active begin date of the listing is their signature date. So it's one or the other. So if I meet with you today and you sign it today, even though I've put a beginning date of tomorrow on the listing agreement, the active first day of our listing agreement is tomorrow. If I put tomorrow's date as the begin date of the listing agreement, but we ultimately don't meet till Monday and that's when you sign it, the begin date of that listing agreement is the 23rd. It's the day you sign it. So it's whatever the date is we sign it, or the begin date, whichever is later, is what the MLS recognizes as a beginning. Okay? That's why it's so important that you guys have people date their signatures. You don't know how many contracts I've seen where it's signed and there's no date written in. The other thing is the problem that it causes when you guys predate contracts, and I've seen that also, where you fill out a listing contract and you already put the date next to the signature spot for the seller, and if you don't meet with them right away and they sign it, everything looks like it started on that date. So please leave the signature dates blank. Make sure your sellers, when they sign, date it, and you also date it when you sign. But knowing this is that we have to make sure we have a begin and an end. All right? There was a lot of information about dates. Questions? Nobody? Everybody's crystal clear on how those dates work. All right. See how many questions I get later. Oh, Jesus raised his hand. Go ahead, Jesus.
Hey, Kyle.
Yeah.
I have a situation where I got the listing, I registered, and unfortunately the owner was sick and we couldn't actually put it not even coming soon until 2 months later, and we couldn't actually work the dates because it was 2 months after. How do we do about that?
Okay. So we'll show the proper way to fill out a listing agreement with registered and coming soon. But if you register a listing, as long as you register it, you're in compliance MLS wise, right? Within the 2 days of the begin date of the signature. The issue that you're dealing with is that you could leave it registered and that's fine, but without having to make it coming soon. But once you make it, what you are having an issue with is that I can't market it, right? So if I had a 6-month listing and we couldn't market it for 2 months, I've just now cut my marketing time down to 4 months. The next step should be, okay, you got sick, we couldn't market it, we left it registered, now we're starting to be active. What we're going to do is a modification of listing, right? So the name of the form is really long. Modification of listing, buyer representation, or other agreement. That's the name of the form. And we say, hey, we're going to change the end date, right? The listing period, we're going to change it. We're going to add a couple months on the end to make sure that we have the proper marketing time. But as long as it was registered, you're not going to get an MLS violation because you registered it. Darwin, I think, had another question.
Let's say that you did a contract today and you seller signed 2 months, almost 3 months later. Is it still valid with the date they signed, even though that you dated like 2-3 months ago, or you have to do a new listing contract?
No. I mean, it would still be valid. It just your end date for the listing period wouldn't change, right? And your active date would be whatever date they signed it. It would still be active. I mean, if you're talking about 1 or 2 days, fine, use the same contract. If you're talking about 2 months, I would have done a new listing agreement and had them sign it. Or if they signed that one because that's what they had in hand already, and they said, "Oh, here, I finally signed it and got back to you."
Yes.
Then I would do the modification of listing, buyer representation, or other agreement. I would have them sign that form and change my listing period.
Got it.
Right, so that my ability to market it wasn't affected. Okay. Anybody else have any questions about that? No. All right. So, address, right? Well, again, we'll just use the office because it's easier than trying to come up with something, right? Telegraph Road. And hold on, it's in Pico. And it's in Los Angeles County. I mean, I know this is pretty self-explanatory. And our zip here is 90660. I don't know the parcel number, so I'm not going to get into that. But just make sure it has the proper address. make sure it has the proper address. Now, if there's more than one APN, get the APNs in there. If there's not, if it has a physical address, the APN is not as important as long as it has a physical address. The APN is really only important when there is no physical address for the property. Okay, so just make sure your address is correct. Now, this property is a manufactured mobile home. So this is the same listing agreement, even if I'm listing a manufactured home or a mobile home, whatever you want to call it, this is still the same form. So if I am, then I would add this form into it, the manufactured home listing addendum. And what it does now is it gives the information about that manufactured home, right? This is part of the residential listing agreement. We know that's detailed. The thing, it's still John Smith, right, is the seller, because that's what it is. The broker is still Century 21 All Stars, right? Now we have to fill out the information about the manufactured home. Now, some of this I may not be able to do until I go on the listing appointment, but I'm going to do what I can. So if it's in a mobile home park, then I'm going to check off this box. Now, I may have to leave some of this stuff blank because I don't know the address or the space number or the park name. I might not know that. So I'll find it out when I go on the listing appointment. I can handwrite that in. It's okay. Now, let's say that this is being sold with real property, meaning the manufactured home still doesn't have a physical foundation. It's not on a permanent foundation. It's just on a piece of vacant land. Then I would do this section here. Or let's say that we had a manufactured home on a vacant lot and we put it on a permanent foundation, so it became a regular, basically, sale, residential sale. That's what this is. Okay? This is just the serial numbers, the description of the manufacturer, the model number. I'm going to put all that stuff in, and I don't know that right now before my listing agreement, so that's probably going to be blank until I get to the listing appointment and we decide to sell the house. Okay? So this would be added to my regular residential listing agreement like normal. So that's the same listing agreement. It's just now it's a manufactured home, so we're adding that form to it. Okay? Or if this is a probate, this is our listing agreement for the probate. What I would do is just add this probate listing addendum and advisory. Okay? Again, it's part of the residential listing agreement. These are the people, John Smith, the seller. I'm not going to go into well, I should. Let's say that this is a probate, right? So John Smith obviously has passed on if it's a probate. So this is the estate of John Smith now, because it's a probate. Then I go here. The property is part of a probate is the default. If it were a conservatorship, a guardianship, or receivership, I would check those off because they're treated the same thing as a probate. Conservatorship would be somebody is just not able to take care of themselves, so somebody was appointed. They haven't passed. They're not deceased. They just can't take care of themselves, so the court appointed somebody to be a conservator of their estate, and they're now taking care of it. Guardianship, the same thing. Somebody was appointed to take care of them. Usually with the guardianship, that means it's a minor, and sometimes things happen where minors end up as owners of property and they can't sell it. Or a receivership, that's businesses. It's a bankruptcy. They get put in a receivership. That property needs to get sold to pay off some debts. Okay, that's what the other choices are. When we talked about before what I said about the listing period on the listing agreement, remember we talked about the start dates here, the start date and the end date. Sorry, I got to do this when I go back and forth between I went too far when I go back and forth between, so sorry if it makes you dizzy. I apologize. We talked about the begin date and the end date here. With the probate listing addendum, it says the listing period shall be the shorter of 90 days or the length of time specified in the listing. So what that's saying is basically that with most probates, they're limiting the listing agreement to a 90-day period. So if you're taking a probate, know that, because what will happen is you'll have to change it anyway when the probate attorney gets it, and especially if it's a court confirmation. Okay. Now we're going to say court confirmation of the sale is required, which means they have limited authority, or maybe required full authority. Okay, so the differences are, right, with the limited authority is there is an administrator or an executor, depending on if there's a will or not. If there is a will, even if it goes through probate, that person is the executor. If there is no will, then that person is an administrator. Okay? So if there is court confirmation required, that administrator or executor is going to, yes, accept the offer that they get, but then they have to set a court date. And then they set the court date, they got to go to court, and the court approves, right? Their rubber stamp on, yeah, this is the offer. We're not going to go into a ton of how the probates work, but just know that that's what it is. If it's a full authority, then that administrator is acting as the seller. They're the person that's going to agree, they're going to disperse all the funds, they're going to do everything. They can make all the choices. You don't need to go back to court. Okay? Somebody unmuted. So Angel, you had a question?
Yeah, can you please repeat again the when there is a will or no will, then what the case?
Yeah.
will be?
So let's, for example, I pass away and I have a will. I have a last will and testament that states what I want things to happen after I pass away. But I don't have a trust. Right? My property's not in a trust. I don't have a living trust. So any of my property still has to go through probate, even with a will. So if I have a will, that will generally states who I want to be the person to oversee, the executor, of my wishes that are stated in that will. So if I go to probate court, that usually is the person that gets assigned to the estate to take care of everything. So they're still called an executor. Vice versa, I don't have a will. I don't have anything that states what I want to have happen after I pass away. It has to go to probate court because I didn't have a trust. Then what happens is somebody has to basically nominate themselves to be the administrator of the estate to take care of everything. And then that person goes to court, and when they go to court, the court says, okay, who's going to be the administrator? Well, it's going to be me. So they put the name down of the person that's administrator. And then in California, you have to wait 42 days to let people come out of, the family or other relationships with the decedent and decide if they want to protest against that person being the administrator. And then once it clears, they're now assigned as administrator and they make all the choices. So the only difference between administrator and executor is the existence of a will. That's it.
Thank you, Kyle.
You're welcome. Okay. Information about the listing will not be provided in the MLS if the person who is signing this, the administrator or the executor, doesn't want it in the MLS. They're going to check that box. Compensation specified to broker and any cooperating broker is subject to any restrictions imposed by the California Probate Code and the determination of the court. So just know that generally for probates, they do not allow you to do more than a 5% total commission. So if you're going on a listing appointment for a probate, don't write 6% in because you're not going to get it. And even that 5%, if there is court confirmation, even that 5% is not guaranteed. The court that's confirming it, depending on how many heirs there are, how they have to pay off debts, they may reduce your commission. Okay? Dispute resolution, you can initial it, you could do all that stuff, it's fine. It is, these listings are exempt from that because any dispute goes through the probate court. Yeah, Jesus, go ahead.
Yes, when it comes to probate, isn't it when it's full authority, the administrator actually has the right to choose 6%?
They may, but the chances of that happening are slim because they've already been told by their probate attorneys generally that there's a limit of 5%. So the chances are you're not going to get the 6 anyway, and even if you do, the attorney may get in your seller's ear. But that's what I'm saying. Majority of them, especially with the court confirmation, they're limited to 5%, and they could make it even less, even though you agree to the 5%. So just know that, okay? Especially on the court confirmations. Karen, did you have something? I thought I saw you unmute.
No, No, it's okay. It's okay because sometimes when you're in front of the actual judge, they can even tell you like, oh, it's gonna go 4%.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
even
that's what I
if the
just said. They
attorney,
could.
yeah, even if the attorney says yeah 6, when you go and you're in front of the judge, even the judge can say no 4 or 5.
Yeah, yeah, but a judge is never going to let you have 6. Not going to
Yeah.
happen. 5 is your max if there's a court confirmation. 5 is your max, and that's actually what the civil code says, that's the maximum that they're supposed to pay on there. But the judge could lower it. They could lower it to whatever they want it to be. So you guys have to understand that. Okay. The dispute resolution, like we said, is there is no mediation, arbitration, litigation, small claims, none of that. It goes right back to the probate court. Probate advisory. The probate advisory comes with this agreement, so you'll have it. The title of the property is this. Now, the reason it has that is because I write it. This is the proper way to do it, right? The seller is the estate of John Smith. Title is going to be John Smith. And whatever it is, John Smith as sole and separate property, a married man or unmarried man, sole and separate, whatever the vesting is, that's what we're going to write in here. The title is going to go here. And the reason it says notwithstanding any term in the listing to the contrary is because sometimes, even though this is the proper way to do it, or even without the estate of just John Smith, because that's what title shows, and then we'll get to the entity seller and all that, sometimes what happens is they want John Smith and then they want Jane Smith, administrator of, right? They want that whole, attorneys want that written in. They're not the seller, so technically their name shouldn't be there, but sometimes that's how attorneys want it to read, and I usually don't argue with them, even though I know it's not proper. Just go ahead and do it, okay? But that's why this says notwithstanding any term in the listing to the contrary. It wants to know this is what the actual title shows. No matter if I put on there somebody else, that's the title, okay? Now, the seller's going to say estate of John Smith or John Smith, but somebody else is going to sign it, right? Because there's an administrator. So we'll get to that. In the listing contract, it'll change the signatures, okay? Questions as I go back to the listing agreement here. This is a little bit more in depth on the listing contract than I normally go, but I wanted to make sure because I've been getting a lot of questions about probate. We've been seeing a lot of probates here in the office. Okay. All right. Where are we? Listing contract. There we are. Okay. Price. Now, if I'm going on a listing agreement and I've done my CMA, I'm generally going to put my price in. What I believe is the price that I'm going to suggest to the seller. Now, the seller is going to, right, we're going to negotiate, we're going to do our presentation. I may change that. That's okay. But if I do change it, instead of leaving this blank and filling it out when I get there, we'll just cross it out. I'm just going to cross it out, handwrite our new listing price, listing price, and then have the seller initial next to it that we crossed it out and changed it. Okay? That's what we're going to do. And I think what that does is it just helps you in the confidence of what you've determined as far as price goes. Okay? That's just my fit. Now, your business model may be slightly different. You don't want to do that. You want to get them to agree to a price and then put it in together so it looks like, hey, we agreed on this price together. Totally understand. Again, it becomes a business decision for you, how you do your presentations, how you do the contracts. Just as long as you have something in there, you got to have a price. Just like we have to have a begin date and an end date. If I don't have a price and somebody signs it, unenforceable. Okay? And I've seen people come back to the office, bring me listing agreements without a begin date, without an end date, without a price, and say, oh, it's because we're going to determine the price later. I just wanted to get them to sign. It's meaningless, right? It doesn't mean anything. If there's no price in there, if there's no begin date, if there's no end date, it's unenforceable, that contract. They don't ever have to agree to work under those terms. Okay, so please make sure you have a price. this listing terms could be anything, a clause that they put in, like, hey, we're only going to sell if we reach X amount, or we need to net X amount, and that's why we're starting at this. Like those would be the terms that you would put in there. Whatever it is that they make as a condition of the listing, right, based on that price. Compensation. So I know that everybody's heard about these compensation lawsuits and how, you know, the people believe it's unfair that the sellers are paying the commission. And I think that, paying the commission for the cooperating brokers. And I think that part of the reason why this has opened up is because we're not doing our job explaining to the sellers properly how the compensation works. I know that people will talk about their compensation and say, well, the reason you have to pay 6% is because I have to offer 3% to the buyer's agent and 3% to me. Or they'll even say, that 6% is because you're paying the buyer's agent 3% and you're paying me 3% to represent you. Well, that's not the proper way to describe it. The proper way to describe it is that the cost of selling your property, the total compensation that you're going to pay, is you're paying me 6% or 5% or 4% or whatever it is that you negotiate, because commissions are negotiable. And we have to make sure that the sellers understand that. The amount or rate of real estate commissions is not fixed by law. So there's nothing that says it has to be a certain amount. They are set by each broker individually and may be negotiable between buyer, seller, and broker. Real estate commissions include all compensation and fees to brokers. So that's how it works, right? So yeah, it's negotiable. And whatever your business plan is, yes, I usually, because of the amount of work I do, because of the marketing I do, I normally charge 6%. And from that 6% I charge, I pay for photographs, for staging, for the marketing material. It compensates me for the work I do and try to promote your property. I get that. And a portion of that 6% you're paying me, I then take and offer to a cooperating broker to entice them to write an offer on your property and to bring their buyers in and show them. So you're paying me to do all of that. Okay, so whether that be 6% or 5%, whatever is your business model that you do, there is nothing that says it has to be a certain amount. Now, if you're negotiating is I do 6% because I do X, Y, and Z, and this is why I do it, and this is what I offer to cooperating brokers, if you'd like to negotiate, the next step is we can negotiate up, because it makes, right, because then I do more things for 7% than I do for 6. Or if we go down to 5%, these are the things. You could have a sliding scale. If you want to show proof of the things that you do, you could have maybe you have in your marketing plan, these are the things I do. If you choose to pay a 6% commission, I offer X amount to cooperating brokers to entice them, and then I do these 11 things to market. If you'd rather pay a 5% commission, this is what I'll do. I will do these 9 things instead of the 11, and this is what I will offer to cooperating brokers to come and entice them. If you want to pay 4%, I do these 6 things to market your home. There's nothing wrong with that, and at least you're being transparent. All I'm saying is you have to be prepared as to why you're charging what you're charging, have the skills to be able to sell it to the seller and let them understand that this is not them paying the other brokers to come in. They're paying you to do your job as an umbrella, and part of your job is to entice other brokers to bring their buyers into their home. And I do that by offering compensation to them. And so if you want me to offer less compensation to them, then the total compensation is going to be whatever it's going to be. And these are the things we'll do depending on how you negotiate the compensation with them. But you've got to be clear that this is not something that's set in stone. It doesn't have to be that number. The seller is not paying the other broker. That they're, that's not, we got to make sure that that's clear, because that's what's led into this lawsuit that we're dealing with. And if things continue to go poorly or we don't do our jobs properly, then the compensation for buyers brokers could disappear. Do I believe it is? No, but it could disappear, and it could be a lot harder for buyers agents to do their business. And that's just something that we could do, but it's really based on us being more skillful and being more transparent and being clear with our sellers on what's happening. Okay, so that's the total compensation. So I guess what we'll do is we'll stop right there. We'll talk about compensation and how you can get paid and all of those things next week. But does anybody have any questions right now? before we finish for the day? Anybody? All right. Okay, so then that's it. What we'll do is we'll finish the listing agreement next Thursday. If you need anything, you know how to get a hold of me. Thank you guys for watching. Later on, if you missed any part of this, it's going to be on YouTube. You can go back, take a look at it. I think, I've gotten a couple calls from agents recently, and they told me, hey, I've been looking at your videos and they're helping me, because then at night when I'm trying to write an offer or whatever it is, I'm looking for forms, I go back to your videos. So I appreciate those comments that I get from you guys, and I hope that you are getting value from them and taking advantage. So thank you guys for being here. Take care. Be productive. I will talk to you soon.